Surreal. I'm not quite sure what you say after that. I could try to turn attention to Lindsay Davis's rock star year, or share this moment with all the honorees in the room, which I think is only appropriate. Senator Blumenthal, Bob, Barb, Steve, who couldn't be here, the team at 60, and Lori, who said earlier about that moment with her son, and just please tell your son that we can continue that conversation anytime he'd like. I am honored, I am filled with profound gratitude as I stand before you here tonight. I want to thank RTDNF. I want to thank my colleagues, Robin, Diane, Martha, who's here, the whole team from Washington, and the team from New York. And this is a family that I've been working with since the very beginning, long before this current job that I have, but the weekend news, putting it together with an extension cord and a magic marker. They've been with me from the very beginning, and they're all here tonight. The news division president, James Goldston, sitting here with me as well, and Almin Karametovic, the executive producer, who often leaves right after the newscast with me carrying his camera. Grateful to have you all here with me tonight. I do realize that after that video tonight, I will never be allowed to hold any newborn again. But I mean, come on, look at how Wyatt turned out. I don't think anything went wrong. But mentioning Fukushima in a maternity ward, I mean, I should have thought about that. There are so many moments that shape us along the way, all the journalists in this room. There are the adversities that we face through childhood, adolescence, in our adult lives, and let's face it, we have all faced those moments, and hopefully we cherish those moments, because I think it's the tolerance born from that adversity that makes us better, stronger, more tolerant journalists later on. I remember as a boy in upstate New York, I would excuse myself from the backyard, everybody else would be playing, and I'd be the only one who'd go in to watch the news. I'd watch the local news, I would devour World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, and it's true, although I probably could not have put words to it at the time, why I was drawn necessarily to Peter, although I would try to guess who the person of the week was with the clues that he would offer, and I recognize now that he was having a conversation with America, and I somehow wanted in on that conversation. And he was the globetrotter. Certainly Dan and Tom were on the air at the time, and they all traveled all over the world to witness such historic moments, and Peter was always right there too. And so there was something about that that gave me a little bit of hope as a kid from upstate New York that maybe one day I would see the world too. I did do the news from a cardboard box in my living room at one point. And I also wrote to the local news reporters. I think I was 12 or 13 years old, and some of them probably look back on that and think, why did we write back to this kid? But they did, and they invited me in, and I began interning, I think at 14 years old, carrying all the equipment. And there was a fair amount of hazing involved, and it would make sense when you're 14 and your voice hasn't changed yet, and you're going to the newsroom, and they would, on school breaks and vacations, march me right up to that doorway in the newsroom and measure how much I had grown from year to year and how many octaves my voice had fallen from year to year, and I'm grateful that it did, otherwise I wouldn't be here. There are so many moments in that video as I was watching that remind me of the lessons I've learned along the way, and I'm sure many of you in this room have learned. In Katrina, we were sleeping on the floor of the Superdome. The hurricane hadn't hit yet, and I'll never forget, when it did hit, the top of the roof of the Superdome began to peel back, and I watched as the families of New Orleans, who had been told to go to the Superdome with their belongings to seek shelter, it was literally raining on them. And I thought the indignity of what it was they were going through, and little did any of us know that the true horror hadn't even set in yet. The levees would then break, and all of these families would be told to go to the convention center where there would be help, food and medicine. And the families listened. And I remember traveling to the convention center. We wanted to check in on the families. And we turned the corner and we were in whatever rental car we could get our hands on at the time. And I distinctly remember it was overflowing with people. They were out front, the families, the mothers, and we drove by, the window was down in the car, and we had our camera trained on the faces. And the moms were crying out, literally saying, "We need help." And I thought at the time, and this is probably from my own childhood and being a fairly young reporter at ABC, that this was a terrible invasion of their suffering, me in this car with our camera trained on them. I wanted to sink down in the seat. But that was a turning point in that story, and I know many people in this room were also down covering Katrina. And I think that was a powerful lesson, not only for me, but for all of us down there, about the power of an image, of letting those voices be heard, because it was after those images from a number of us that the help finally arrived. And I carry that lesson with me through all of the reporting that we do. It's a fundamental responsibility I think we have in this job to exercise that right, truly the right that comes with the First Amendment, which is to give a voice to those who otherwise would not have one. I think about the child refugees in Syria. We hopped on the back of that flatbed with them. They were going out to the potato fields, singing songs, and these are children who have been ripped from their schools and from everything they knew in Syria. They were on the Lebanon border. And they were filling potato bags, 6, 7, 8-hour workdays. And yet they were so cheerful, they were so happy I was in the back of that pickup truck to tell their story. And I'm sure many of you do this too, but on my iPhone, I have carried for years. I haven't downloaded any of these photos. I carry all of the still photos I take of these children that I meet along the way. And it wasn't terribly long ago, we were in Beirut, and I wanted to try to see if we could find one of those children. And it was in the middle of another breaking story, so there wasn't a lot of time to do that, but we went to what had been a makeshift auto repair shop that the father had set up. The mother had been a school teacher in Syria. Both had lost their jobs, obviously. And we turned the corner. We were just going up and down. I had a sense of the neighborhood, but wasn't sure which street it would be. And we pull up, and I recognize this repair shop. And the father has a beaming smile immediately as soon as the door opened. He'd remembered us from years earlier. And he said, "Rami is out in the soccer fields. I wish you could see him." And I said, "Well, that's why I'm here." And so we waited, and we went on quite a hunt through the soccer fields of Beirut, and we could not find him. And hours later, before we were getting ready to go on the air, I got a call that Rami was home, and they wanted to see us, so we went over. And it's really striking when you return, see a boy become a teenager, and to have him tell you that he still was dreaming of a country he could call home. And to me, that's a reminder that we all get to parachute into these stories, but then we leave, and they continue to live the story, the suffering. And that's why I think it's so important that we return. And it goes back to that fundamental definition of the First Amendment, which is not about us. It really is. And I don't think it's really about any one individual in this room, any one voice, but it is about our power to give others a voice. And we need to continue to protect that and to exercise it. Just a couple of weeks ago, we went to Auschwitz, took a break from impeachment, and thought we'd go back on the 75th anniversary. And we had followed these survivors for weeks as they prepared to go back on this trip. And I'll never forget Tova Friedman, and she had sat down with us for quite a lengthy interview long before we actually made the trip. And she told me, and her story mirrors so many others, and it will sound familiar to you, but she told me that she had been separated from her mother shortly after she arrived at Auschwitz, and that she remembers time had gone by, and it came to the day when they showed up at the barrack and said, "All of you come with us." And they brought the children to one of the crematoriums. And Tova says she remembers being walked along a fence on the way to the crematorium, and she could hear voices, and she didn't recognize the voice at first, and she then realized it was her mother crying out, asking, "Where are you going?" And she was just a child, and you can imagine how she would answer in a sort of matter-of-fact way. She said, "They're taking us. It's our turn now. This is where children go." And she told me how when she was taken into the crematorium, they then said, "Take your clothes off." And anyone who has read and reported on the Holocaust knows that so many of the children and these families were told to take off your clothes, hang them on the hook, remember the number where you're putting your clothes, leading them, of course, to believe that they would return to them. And while so many did not, on that particular day, Tova remembers the adults in the room with the clipboards and the anger in the room and the chaos that ensued. And she suddenly said that they all said to the children, "Put your clothes back on." So she did, and they marched again along that fence. And as they were walking back along the fence, she then heard her mother again. And her mother, she said, asked, "What happened?" And she said, "Well, something went wrong, but they'll bring us another day, Mommy." Because that's what a child whose horror becomes reality will do. But what Tova said she didn't realize at that point, she's just a child, and certainly her mother didn't know either, was that the Soviets were about to arrive. The Red Army was going to be there soon thereafter, and Tova and her mother would be spared. And I just share that story with you because when we returned to Auschwitz, I remember waiting for Tova and the group of survivors that we had profiled to arrive and greeting her back where she had been 75 years ago. And there was one of the crematoriums there, and she wanted to go in, and she felt very strongly about this. And so we went into the crematorium, and I suddenly had this feeling that washed over me that was very much like the moment we drove past the convention center all those years ago. That this was an invasion of an incredibly personal moment for Tova. And so I stood back and just watched from afar. And she didn't say much. She offered a prayer. And when she emerged from the crematorium, the tears streaming down her face, she said to me, "Thank you." And I said to her what any of you in this room would say, which is, "No, Tova, thank you for sharing your story." And she said, "No, thank you because you listened. And if you hadn't listened, our story would not still be alive today." And I think that we are reminded of the power of the First Amendment every time we come in contact with someone like Tova. And as I was preparing for this award, I thought I should share that moment because she reminded me of something which is intuitive for all of us who've been on all of these stories of suffering, and then we have to leave, and we wonder how it all turned out. And Tova told me that it was a gift to her that I listened to her. And I quietly thought to myself, this is a gift. A huge responsibility for all of this in this room, but a gift to be able to listen to her. And I think that as long as we think about it in those terms, we will always be on the right side of history. I said at the beginning here tonight that I'm a student of television. I would hope that we all still are. What a gift it is to show up at work every day and learn something new and to be tested in a new way, to try to peel back another layer, and some days we do a better job of it than others. But I've learned from many in this room. I mean, I grew up watching 60 Minutes. I still watch 60 Minutes. It's appointment television. I watch the competitors at NBC, and I have great respect for all of the work that it is that we do. And you know, when we throw out a lead story 3 or 4 times in the last hour before air, I don't think, wow, I can't believe we're doing this. Can't believe he pulled this off again. I think the smart folks in this room recognize that we're all doing that. Day in, day out, there is exhaustion, but we keep doing it. And I think more than ever, we ought to have each other's backs in this moment. There are a few people that I want to point out in particular, because when I talk about learning from people in the room, there was something that I read a couple of weeks back, and I shared it with Robin. And it said, no matter how hard it gets, keep going on your journey, because you're never quite sure who's watching you. And to me, when I read it, I thought of Robin Roberts. You lead by example. And I just look around the table, Martha Raddatz, who's fearless. I mean, the pictures of us on the Syrian border are nothing compared to what Martha has done. I think of Diane Sawyer, and I love that clip from 60 Minutes, and I love her stories from 60 through the years, and I There are countless times when Diane has found a way to signal to me that if you're in a situation that is extremely uncomfortable and you're pressing someone of power, keep going, make it uncomfortable, demand an answer. And there was a presidential candidate in particular, and I've done a few of these campaigns now, so I won't say who the candidate is. You can try to figure it out. But I was asking the candidate a question, didn't like the question, but I pressed. And the campaign called right afterward and put enormous pressure on us, asking us why would we use that exchange at all. And not only did we use the exchange, but we used the follow-up because word came from Diane. And she said, you are going to use that exchange, and if they don't like it, we'll do a 3-part series on that exchange. I love that about her and about the message that that sends. And that's the message I hope we send every night as a team. I stand here in this room, humbled by that video, by the people who have been honored before me. And I simply ask, let's all not only celebrate the First Amendment, but let's all continue to inspire each other. Just remember the people like Tova and the children on the Syrian border and the families at Katrina. We are the caretakers of their words. They share with us their stories, but we're the caretakers. We stand as guardians of the First Amendment. And I'm really, really proud to stand here with you tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you to all the honorees. Wonderful speeches here tonight. Before we go, I would like to recognize the professional staff of the RTDNF and the RTDNA who are doing the work for us on an association level. Dan Shelley, Karen Hansen, Kate McGarity, Kristen DeBard, Kate Helster, and Tara Puckey. These are the individuals that have our back. They're helping us fight for press freedoms, and I want to offer our thanks and congratulations to you. Thank you again to Lindsay Davis for the wonderful work tonight as our Master of Ceremonies. Congratulations one more time to all of our honorees tonight. And we appreciate all of your support for the Radio and Television Digital News Foundation and hope that you will continue to support this foundation's valuable work in the future. A reminder, the Radio Television Digital News Association will host their annual Excellence in Journalism Conference here in Washington this year. This year's event will take place at the Washington Hilton, September 10th through the 12th, and we encourage you to consider attending our annual training event and direct you to rtdna.org for more information. With that, have a great night, and thanks again for coming.